Hello, I'm Jan Newharth, Chair and Chief Executive Officer of the Freedom Forum. Welcome to First Five Now, a Freedom Forum conversation that explores topical issues and features current newsmakers who are using the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment to guide their work. The goal of First Five Now is to provide differing perspectives and to reach a broad and diverse audience to help people understand and value the powerful role the First Amendment plays in our lives. The Freedom Forum is one of the nation's largest foundations focused on First Amendment issues. Our mission is to foster First Amendment freedoms for all through education, advocacy, and action. We hope you enjoy the program.
Thank you, Jan, and welcome to First Five Now. I'm John Maynard, Senior Director of Programs for the Freedom Forum and your moderator for our program. The topic is the inspiring new documentary film, John Lewis, Good Trouble, which chronicles the life and career of the legendary civil rights activist and U.S. representative from Georgia. The film uses interviews and rare archival footage and looks at Lewis's 60-plus years of social activism and legislative action on civil rights, voting rights, gun control, healthcare reform, and immigration. We are joined by the film's director and producer, Dawn Porter, an award-winning filmmaker whose work has appeared on HBO, PBS, Discovery, and Netflix. She is also working on a documentary about photojournalist Pete Souza and an Apple TV series with Oprah Winfrey and Prince Harry that focuses on mental illness and well-being. Also joining us is Erika Alexander, co-founder of Color Farm Media, one of the producers of the film, whose mission is to foster greater equality, inclusion, and diversity in media. She's also an acclaimed actress who's had several roles, including in the TV series Living Single and the movie Get Out. Before we start this conversation, let's play the trailer for the movie John Lewis, Good Trouble.
My philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
He was always different than every member of Congress. Everybody knew what he had done. He was John Lewis.
We're marching today to dramatize to the world that hundreds and thousands of Negro citizens denied the right to vote.
Congressman Lewis gave us the blueprint to organize and to legislate.
The reason why he's effective as a leader is because he's lived it.
We made a decision to march in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion from Selma to Montgomery.
Your orders to disperse this march will not continue.
I was hit in the head. My knees went from under me. I thought I was going to down the bridge.
If John Lewis, as a 19, 20-year-old, wasn't doing what he did, I would not be here.
We will march with the spirit of love and with the spirit of dignity that we have shown here today.
The whole time he was in the movement, it was frightening, knowing the danger, knowing what could happen.
You cannot replace a John Lewis.
He's the most courageous person I ever met.
Too many people struggled and died to make it possible for every American to exercise their right to vote.
He challenges the conscience of the Congress.
Bring common sense gun control legislation to the House floor.
40 years later, John Lewis continues to inspire us.
Are you with me? Let me hear you. 3 civil rights workers that were murdered for trying to help people get registered to vote are looking down on us.
This is a time for action. That's what I learned from John Lewis.
There are forces in America today want to take us back, but we're not going back. We're going forward.
Really a terrific film. I had the privilege of seeing it last month, and you can find it in theaters and also on many digital platforms and on demand. I want to remind our audience that they can ask questions to our panelists by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and hope to get to those by the end of the program. So Dawn and Erika, welcome both, and congratulations on such a terrific film. Dawn, let's start with the genesis of the film and just how this project came to be.
I had done a 4-part series for Netflix entitled Bobby Kennedy for President. And Congressman Lewis was an integral part of that series. And so CNN Films came to me and asked if, John Lewis could have his own film. So I, pretty eagerly dug into that. So we started, we already had identified because, in doing the archival search for the Bobby Kennedy piece, we had identified quite a lot of footage that involved John Lewis because Bobby Kennedy was so involved in civil rights. So the archivist Rich Remsburg and I have worked together very closely on a number of projects. And so we kind of had a running start. And then Erika joined our merry band of bandits. She, at the same time, was developing a film about the congressman. And she had been campaigning with him and a number of other congressional representatives. She kind of serendipitously called me and said, would I be interested in directing? I said, I've actually been working on that with CNN, developing it. And so, we decided to do it together. I think that it was such a great choice for us to embark on the project together. So it's been a great project with all of us.
Yeah, Erika, tell us about your involvement, but also your experience campaigning with Congressman Lewis.
Sure. I often work as a volunteer surrogate for candidates, and I was working for Hillary Clinton in 2016 and went to Georgia to campaign with Congressman Lewis and Stacey Abrams and Ayanna Pressley, and it was a fantastic time. It was pretty unique because I did not know at the time how large their national profiles would blow up and how significant those two young women would turn out to be. And they were lovely then and very powerful. And they were very humbled to be campaigning alongside of Congressman Lewis. So I have to say that it was a master class on how to be young, gifted, and Black in the South in American politics. And he couldn't have been a better host and was very, attentive to us, helping us upstairs out of the car. He wouldn't move until we, it wasn't about helping him. It was like, no. He's a gentleman, he's an OG. So that was really wonderful. And I enjoyed it and will never forget it.
Right. I want to ask both of you, but I'll start with you, Dawn, in regards to the title of the film. What does the congressman mean when he encourages people to get into good trouble?
Yeah, it's really important to remember John Lewis grew up in the time of Emmett Till. I mean, when a Black boy that would even look at a white woman in particular, or even be alleged to have looked at a white woman, could get you killed. And he started as a teenager to challenge discrimination, to challenge segregation. He tried to join his local library and was denied a library card. That's how just rigid the classifications by race were in the Deep South then. So, when he would say to his mother, ask her questions about segregation, and she would say, that's just the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. And he, kind of took that advice and then turned it on his head and thought, this probably is going to be trouble, but it's good trouble, it's necessary trouble. Remembering segregation was legal. So the fact that something is a law is not always an indication of its appropriateness or its justness. And that's what the Congress means by, you have to evaluate for yourself. You have to determine what kind of trouble you're willing to stir things up for.
Erika, this is, of course, an important story to be told at any time, of course, but there's added significance during this country's reckoning over racial injustice. But Erika, what are your thoughts on the timing of this release?
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone could have put these type of a situation together or would want to be in an unprecedented time where we're all at home in a global pandemic and also dealing with the financial collapse of all the world trade and everything like that, but then also with this particular administration. And it's pretty grotesque to think that during all of this that, we're also seeing the George Floyd's and Ahmaud Arbery being executed and killed like they were. And so when you see the unrest that's on the street and people getting out there exercising their right to protest and do these types of things, it's what America's, I think what makes truly America great is the fact that they can do it, but that the fact that it's necessary and that it is good trouble, it is exactly that, and that we got the blueprint from people like John Lewis who were willing to put themselves on the line, and they have. He has spilled his blood and his tears, and he has proven that it's a lifelong thing that you have to do. I think that it's instructive, but now young people and of all ages are currently engaged, and in a way that they, I don't think, ever will forget.
Right. The Freedom Forum is an organization devoted to fostering First Amendment freedoms for all. And John Lewis often speaks passionately about the power of the First Amendment. He's used the five freedoms, of course, including speech and assembly, in his activism. I could ask this to both of you. I'll start with Dawn. How do you use the First Amendment to guide your work?
I began my career as a lawyer, and I worked at a litigation firm. I worked for Baker and Hostetler in Washington, D.C., which has one of the preeminent First Amendment practices in the country. Bruce Sanford leads that practice. And so I've always been, I was a high school journalist, I was a college journalist. So I've always been, and we represented a lot of newspapers at Baker and Hostetler. And I worked occasionally with that group. And then I went to work for a news organization. So, all of my training experience has been kind of infused with this, not only respect, but understanding of how fundamental that free speech right is. And, so for me, it makes, being able to work on a film about a man whose, core value is speaking up, is speaking truth to power, was really important to me on so many levels. I also think I have been terribly terrified about the attacks on journalists, on freedom of the press in these past 3 years. We are seeing just a breathtaking assault on free press. I also led the documentary program at Berkeley School of Journalism for a year. So, I could see firsthand, what the decimation of our local papers. So John Lewis kind of sets the bar really high, and sets and models free speech, even as a member of Congress, doing a sit-in on the floor of the Capitol to protest gun violence is, kind of the essence of our freedom. So that is also why we want to release the film, once the pandemic hit and we had to, change our plans. We want to release the film on the 4th of July, because it's like, what is more American than what John Lewis stands for, what he does, and what he encourages all of us to do: use your voice.
And Erika, as an actress, but also as a producer now, how do you use your First Amendment rights in your work?
Sure. Well, often as an actress, I'm saying other people's words. I'm called to learn a script and promote their ideas. Right then and there, I'm used as a tool in their toolbox to do that. But once actors and so-called people who do that line of work start talking themselves, they're often criticized for speaking up. And I tell everybody, I said, I'm an American citizen. I have a right, just like you, to say what I want to outside of a performance. And that can really irritate people, because we want people to stay in their boxes. That's why they tell athletes to just shut up and dribble. That's why Kaepernick gets in trouble, because he does a silent, peaceful protest to bring awareness to the deaths of these Black men. That's why Muhammad Ali was so instrumental in discussing things, but then he paid the price for it. And then you look at Belafonte and people like Paul Robeson, who Dawn is related to. They were very, very powerful men and women that put themselves on the line by exercising their freedom of speech. And I'm really glad I kind of came into mine pretty you know, my father was a preacher, so he'd been talking his whole life, and he even had an FBI file. I don't know why they were looking at him of all people, but that's the way it was. So I believe in it, and I'm glad I do it, because it would be horrible to be a puppet and not make my own thoughts, put them out there.
Staying on the First Amendment theme, you know, we see John Lewis exercising his freedom of assembly and speech, certainly when he assembled the March on Washington in 1963. How significant was that speech for him, Dawn, which he gave at such a young age, and the trajectory of his career?
You know, he was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington. And I think it came at a time in his activism where John Lewis didn't set out to lead the movement. It just was, he was good at it. And so he kind of put one foot in front of the other and was continuously tapped for bigger and bigger role, you know, in the movement. But an interesting aside is he was asked, not by the government, but by leaders of the movement, you know, older people, to change his speech. So he had written, "We will march into towns like Sherman," which, you know, then was like really controversial, like it was going to be violent, and which is not at all what he meant. He did change his speech, but I think the speech that he ended up giving was just as powerful. But I think that left an impression upon him. And I think he kind of vowed not to, you know, he was in his 20s, early 20s. He was definitely the kid on the block. And there was literally, he was up all night and being pressured to change a lot more of his speech. So I know that made an impact on him. And that he, you know, I don't think he was ever silenced again. I think he, you know, rather than, so fast forward, SNCC is challenging him, Stokely Carmichael is challenging him, and saying things that he didn't agree with, and he resigned rather than kind of go along and be quiet. And I think he's you know, kind of continued in that path. So I think that was a really formative moment for him.
Erika, during the making of this film, and also while you were spending time with Congressman Lewis, what did you learn about him? What were some of the, maybe some surprises that you didn't know about him? You know, this icon.
Well, I learned he's very human. I loved meeting his family. His family is a beautiful family. He has a big family. I really appreciate his sisters and his brothers, and speaking to them and getting to know them a little bit, but also to see their interviews and how they talk about him and how they revere him. But to, you know, many of them, that's their little brother, or, you know, depending on where they fall, you know, big brother. And they have the same sort of discussions, to see him walk around and feed the chickens and test his oratory skills. it's just great. And I think
Chicken Story is a famous one that
it's a famous one, but there he was, Dawn got him on that land, and there he was, feed the chickens. So she got, but I just think that is great, because one of the things about heroes is that we make them into stone blocks and they don't move. And he's very lovely. And in fact, I like that she included the happy dance, that we see him dancing and just loving life. And that's how I think we need to think of ourselves, as living our lives and doing great things every day. And maybe it'll add up to something marvelous, like what he was able to attain. But it's good to see how he lives his life, just like the rest of us.
Right. Dawn, one of the more I found powerful visual elements in the film is John Lewis sitting in a room watching footage of the protests he took part in during the movement as a young man. Was that your idea? Did you come up with that idea? And can you describe to us his reactions as he watched the footage?
That was an idea I had after we were touring with the congressman and filming some parts of what he calls a pilgrimage. He retraces his steps across from Montgomery to Selma and his pilgrimage across the bridge. And so we were in Bryan Stevenson's marvelous Civil Rights Museum in Alabama, and the congressman in the museum is watching an exhibit that's about himself. And so he said, as he's watching it, he just kept saying, I can't believe that's me. I can't believe that's me. And, it got me thinking about one way. Also during the Bobby Kennedy interview, we had showed him some scenes that I think he hadn't seen for quite a while. So all of that information, when you're a director, you're trying to figure out, how do you get your character to tell their best story? How do you take them back in time so they can give you some texture to their memories? So we created, Jessica Congdon is the fabulous editor. She also edited the film Dolores, if any of you have seen that, which is a great film. And so we created these small archival moments and we showed them to him while we had him. We rented a theater, the Arena Stage in Washington, D.C., and we put him in that theater with 3 large screens around. And then we had 5 cameras. So, to tell you the truth, I didn't know if it was going to work. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I'm grateful that I have our lead producer, Laura Michael Chissen, found the money to do it. And Erika and her producing partner, Ben, came. So it was a lot of pressure. Because it could have been a disaster, but it was one of those things that worked out. So sometimes you just have to try something different. But I think, one of the most poignant moments for me is he says while he's in that, I'm seeing things I've never seen before. And, I think he was certainly talking about footage, but I also think his life was just laid out in a way that you can't help but be moved by the significance of his contributions to our constitutional democracy. And so I think that was like a really special filming moment for everybody involved in this project.
Absolutely. I want to take a couple of questions that have been sent to me. I'll throw this out to either one of you, but what advice do you have for filmmakers of impact documentaries who are working to promote their films, and more specifically a film about voting in America? I don't know if that's something.
Yeah, I will start. There is, it's true that the documentary audience has been cultivated to a fact where people are just really happy to consume nonfiction content. So, one thing that I think filmmakers should think of is, as you're raising, and I know it's hard, but as you're raising your production budget, also think about your impact budget. And often foundations will give a separate grant for impact work, because once they've invested in your film, they want it to get out there too. So I now always include some budget, and you can find this, like there are a lot of professors there who are great at writing content and lesson plans for their material, and there's a great hunger for that. And if you can show that money is going to be going for those get out, to get the film out and to get classrooms and people discussing, you can often find separate pots of money that is really for the impact, because at the end we all want our films to be seen and shared and used and thought of and added to our collective discourse. So a lot of the funders are really understanding that now. So I would include that, in your budget.
Right. Erika, that kind of leads into a question for you about your company, Color Farm Media. Can you talk a little bit about its mission and goals?
Sure. I've been in showbiz for 37 years, and it's been a long haul. It's all I've ever done. But what I have noticed, as things transition from film to video to internet and all that, were all the people that were being left behind. When I was discovered in Freedom Theater, in a basement theater called Freedom for Merchant Ivory, and they were looking for little girls. I was 14 at the time, and they had this huge cattle call. And I was found after several auditions and screen tests, but I remember having survivor's remorse and how many girls were not going to be able to join that type of career. I had a SAG card, I had a way to go, I had people who would vouch for me now and make calls, make sure I got an agent, things like that. So I thought, as I got to be a little older and sort of realized that the power lied within the creator, the writers, specifically, and people who would make film, as opposed to me waiting to get an audition and to be hired, that that I should maybe try to do that myself, but it took me a long time to sort of create the discipline around that and get people to know I wrote and those types of things. So Color Farm Media is, we call ourselves the Motown of film, television, and tech, and we're there to provide more equity and diversity around filmmaking, but also to create a bridge from the street to the mainstream, because they work in tandem, but we don't have the resources or the assets going to the street. And to do a little bit of what Berry Gordy did by taking that loan from his parents and then applying it to just the talent and friends that he knew, and that included people like Stevie Wonder and Diana Ross and Smokey Robinson. Imagine a world without all of those people, Marvin Gaye. You can't. And, over and over, especially Black people and people of color, women have had to see their own dreams, and they don't necessarily get leverage or support thereafter. So our idea is to create more of that. And I co-founded it with Ben Arnon, and we both come from the political world a little bit. So we're applying the grassroots lessons that we learned to see if we can also create a pipeline of support and also education, because showbiz is different from many of the other things that people can learn. And I think there's not enough back and forth. So that's what we created, and that's what we're doing.
Great. We have time for just a couple more questions. I want to take one last one from the virtual audience. I'll read this. John Lewis has continued to speak out and get in good trouble on a variety of issues, from gun violence, climate change, LGBTQ rights, immigration reform. What core, and maybe Don, you could take this, but what core principles do you think he looks to in taking on political issues? So what core principles?
Yeah, I think he always stresses, our common humanity, and that, you look beyond a person's, race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. He's very fond of saying we're all a member of one race, the human race. I think he was very moved and impacted by the multi-racial movement for civil rights, and that he found that was the most effective way for lasting change, that you couldn't, as a minority, you couldn't drag the rest of the country screaming. You had to actually engage with people and find, you can celebrate your heritage, but also, find your commonality. So I think if you see in all of that, it's each of our individual racial, gender, sexual orientation, identification characteristics are part of who we are, but it's not the total of who we are. So I think he looks to our commonalities.
And then there's a virtual follow-up question. Through your interviews and research, did he express change in opinion on any issues? I don't know if you could.
Did he change his opinion?
Express a change in opinion on any of the issues?
John Lewis was remarkably, ahead of his time in his, he studied philosophy. He was a religion major and a philosophy major. And he studied Gandhi. He went abroad to Africa. So I think very early in his life, he identified this kind of compassion and respect and decency for humanity, to the point where Bayard Rustin was a gay activist in the civil rights movement and faced a lot of homophobia. Many of the Black leaders at the time were quite homophobic, and John Lewis pushed up against that and resisted that, back in the very, very early in his career, 1950s, 1960s. So I have not seen, I've read every book that I could find about him. I've interviewed him, spoken to him. I've spoken to hundreds of people about him. I did not find anyone who said he had to evolve. I think that he determined quite early in his life that he really believed deeply in equality.
And I'll just ask one final question. And again, this goes back to the First Amendment. What can you tell our audience, people in general, what they can do to follow in John Lewis's footsteps and to activate their own First Amendment rights?
Well, also to the point of practice what you preach, we have a social justice campaign that is accompanying this film. It's you can find it at makegoodtrouble.com. And there you can check your voting rights status. You can also donate to nonpartisan good government types who are working to assure that everybody is registered and that everybody can access their franchise. So I would encourage you to do that, to make sure that you are participating. If you have any opinion about our current political status, whatever your opinion is, hopefully you will exercise it and make your voice heard. And then, on the private side, I've been really focused. You don't have to be a John Lewis in order to be brave and to make a change. You don't have to face the police batons. You can do things like do not allow anti-Semitic, or other racist remarks to go unchallenged. Don't participate in that. So there are things kind of personal, in our own lives that we can do. And then, like Mr. Lewis always would say to me when I would say this happened or that happened, or I was upset about this or that, he would kind of focus it to what can you do? So I think, and he calls it an executive session with himself, focusing on what is in your ability to do. So I encourage all of us, while we're more at home than we have been for a while, to be thinking about the world that we want and what is our part in creating it.
Right. Excellent. And Erika, remind us how people can watch the film. I know there's countless digital platforms, correct? And also on demand.
Absolutely, and they should go to johnlewisgoodtrouble.com and they'll get a link there. They should also go on any of the streamers that they like to watch. And if you're in particular support a group like NAACP or the Poor People's Campaign, Color of Change, there are portals that if you buy a ticket through them, the ticket price is split, and you can also donate to that organization. So I think that that's one of the impact things that we're really very proud about that this film does.
Great. Well, Dawn Porter and Erika Alexander, thank you so much for joining us today on First Five Now. I just want to tell people that join us next week at 2 p.m. for another edition of our program. We'll be featuring a conversation taped recently about the civil rights movement from the Freedom Riders to Black Lives Matter. And that program will be made available on the Freedom Forum's YouTube channel Thursday, July 16th at 2 p.m. And for more information about all our initiatives and programs, please visit freedomforum.org. Again, thank you all for joining us today. And Dawn and Erika, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. That looks like a great program. I'm going to tune in.
Yeah.
You bet.